knowledge, resources, and people they need to enhance their impact in their companies and in their communities. Before we get started with today's webcast, I do just want to point out a couple upcoming ACCP programs. Our next webcast will be on September 28th on social investment, driving long-term CSR impact. Our annual conference is coming up in just a few weeks. We're very excited about that. This year's conference will be in Denver, Colorado on October 16 through 18. We are at capacity for the conference, but we do have a wait list. And so my colleagues will drop the email address you can use in case you are interested in registering, but haven't yet got around to doing that. And then finally, our last virtual summit of the year will be our Impact Measurement Summit. And that will be held on December 5 through 6. And registration for that program will be opening up next week. Now for just a few webcast housekeeping. We have enabled live transcripts so you can view subtitles on today's webcast. We also, we encourage you to use chat in Zoom to engage with the panelists as well as your fellow participants. And then we will be taking Q&A throughout, and particularly reserve some time at the end for your questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A section. If you see a question that resonates with you, upvote it with the thumbs up icon, and we'll make sure that we get all your questions answered today. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers today, Maureen Flynn and Leah Brody, both for Changing Our World.
Thank you so much. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session. I'm Leah, and I'm here with my colleague, Maureen, and we're really excited to speak with you today about social impact storytelling. So I personally have a passion for communications. I love doing this work, and this is one of my favorite things to help our clients with. So thank you for being here. Before we get started, I just want to share a little bit about Changing Our World. So Changing Our World is a social impact consulting firm, and our team specializes in designing and implementing strategic programs that deliver social impact while driving business objectives. We help our clients leverage their resources and engage their stakeholders to address pressing social needs. And while we're not a communications firm, we are part of Omnicom, which is a large network of communications agencies, brand consultancies, ad agencies, and the like. And we often partner with our sister agencies, which has enabled us to see some of the common challenges and missteps companies take when thinking about social impact communications. And we also do a lot of communications work with our own clients. We help them draft their overarching social impact narrative and tell their story. So again, thanks for being here, and we're excited to get started. So before we really get into today's session, we just want to be real with you for a minute. There is no quick fix for solving the challenge that is CSR communications. If there was, my job might be at risk and your jobs would probably be a lot easier. But with some planning, guidance, and commitment, you can share your social impact story in a way that is effective, engaging, and hopefully a little less painful. And so for today's session, we're really going to just share some tips around using a framework to create a clear, concise, and memorable social impact narrative. We'll review the components of an effective communications plan, and we'll offer some tips and tactics to help engage and inspire your key stakeholders.
Okay, thank you, Leah. We just wanted to start with a bit of a level set. From our perspective in the work that we do, we often see, not always, but often, a tension between the social impact teams that we're working with and the communications teams when it comes to designing and articulating a company's social impact story. Now, I know some of you might have, or you might even be, a seasoned CSR professional that focuses on communications specifically, or even, be lucky enough to partner with a communications agency on some of this work. And in this instance, we're not necessarily talking about you, but what we often find is that communications teams tend to look for a series of stories that they can share. Think like your big partnership announcements, or your annual month of service, or perhaps the launch of your latest ESG report. things of that nature. They often, come to the social impact teams and look for those big moments where they can really, understand what's going to be happening throughout the year and not necessarily view this as an opportunity to infuse social impact storytelling into the overarching communication strategy for the broader business, and even oftentimes for brand positioning. And then on the flip side, we often hear from the communications teams that they're really challenged with managing a wide range of messaging from the social impact team, that there's a series of initiatives, oftentimes a lot of different partners and programs, and they don't always have really clear direction on the overarching narrative, or really an understanding of those consistent themes or that North Star that should be pulled in throughout all of your communications. So we will spend some time today talking about this work, really as an opportunity for ongoing communication, opportunity to focus on your broader commitments, the social issues that you're uniquely positioned to address, and also the overall impact that you're making across the business in the communities that you serve. So we do just want to pause and do a quick pulse check with you all. We have a poll that can be pulled up, and we really just want to focus first on sort of what are the specific communications challenges that you all might be facing. So we'll just take a couple seconds for folks to respond. And then we can share the results. We did also do a similar poll on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago, so we'll have to see if there's any consistency or variation in the themes. Okay, I think we can pull that up. Okay, so some consistency, I think, off the bat. We don't have a dedicated communications resource. Tends to be one of the biggest themes that we often see, with 28% of you all responding there, and not being a priority for our corporate communications team. Again, I think another consistent theme that we often see. When we did ask LinkedIn, I think the top 2 responses were also lack of resource and time, and then engaging stakeholders. So this is super helpful to kind of set the context for today's session. So thank you for the response. Okay, so we do want to talk a little bit about these challenges, since we know it's probably the reason why you're here today. But again, despite not being a true communications agency, because of the strategy work that we're often brought in to focus on, our clients often come to us when they're facing roadblocks or challenges here. So we thought it would be helpful to talk through some of these, as well as how we typically start to address them. And we'll kind of get more into some of the detail throughout the presentation today. So number 1 response from you all: we don't have a person dedicated to communications. We really believe that some basic organization and planning can go a long way. You don't need to be a communications expert, or even, frankly, the best writer in the world, but getting a handle on understanding who your key audiences are, and understanding how they want to receive information and the types of messaging that might resonate with them can really start to be the framework, and also an opportunity to kind of build communications planning into kind of your broader strategy planning that you may be accounting for each year. The second one, we're not a priority for the communications team. I do think we've seen a lot of movement here. It wasn't the number 1 response, but I think more and more companies are recognizing that this work is now a business imperative, but we know that lots of folks are still grappling with this one. So we always start with education and partnership as really the place to kind of win over your comms folk, because I think sharing best practices and peer examples is really helpful, as well as making and informing them on how your work can support other business initiatives. So we hear a lot of times that CSR comms going to get pushed or delayed because there's more important communications out there, and we know that can be frustrating. But I think really thinking about some of the ways where your work can be integrated into broader corporate communications and not just seen as sort of the standalone silo is really important. We don't just want this to be, a news tab across a series of news articles on your website. And I think, one place we often encourage our clients to be informed on is really understanding what are the other major messages that might be coming down the pipeline. Are there meetings? Are there convenings or other places coming up where you might be able to naturally plug in your message?
Yeah, so we were one of our clients, their challenge was that a lot of their company's communications were really focused around return to office. But by understanding that that was the priority, they were actually able to leverage some of those communications to highlight opportunities for in-office volunteer engagement that was coming down the line. So that's just an example of how they were able to kind of integrate that messaging.
Yeah, that's an awesome example. I think we have a number of clients that are pushing their comms team to think about ways to integrate this work. And I know we had another healthcare client with, not surprising, a big focus and push on health equity. And as they were starting to announce some major acquisitions in that space, it became clear that a lot of those acquisitions were actually really going to enable them to think about making access to care easier, more efficient. And so we worked with the CSR team to really think about, those health equity commitments and kind of that thread line to make sense about those acquisitions. And so it made it much easier to kind of make the case when it felt part of a bigger business initiative. So I think that's another important example of how you can weave some of that messaging into things like press releases. And then the next one is we aren't sure what to highlight or what content's going to resonate. And we'll talk a little bit later about stakeholder engagement. We talk a lot about we love stakeholder engagement. But, leveraging feedback and understanding what people want to hear is really important to informing your overarching strategy. You're not going to know what's going to work unless you actually ask. So if it's formal or informal, we really encourage speaking to your stakeholders just to understand how they like to receive information, what their interests are. And it can be as simple as, surveying folks, bringing together small groups and in focus groups. We're just really pulling people aside when you're in sort of informal meetings to kind of better understand what's working and where you might be missing the mark.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be like a huge stakeholder engagement that's specifically around communications. We have a client who we do a lot of stakeholder engagement work with, and every time we talk to employees, no matter what the main thing that we're focusing on is, we always ask where they receive company information and how they prefer to receive it. And then we use that information to adjust the comm strategy as needed.
Yeah, and we make a lot of assumptions around communications. We see it all the time. We have a client with a pretty significant employee engagement volunteerism strategy, and we were really, hearing a lot about email fatigue and thinking about, new ways to talk about encouraging participation. And as part of that outreach, we were reflecting on a lot of the communications that have been in place, and most of them were really showcasing the volunteer partners, the great impact of their work. And that was all really important and people really enjoyed it. But what we found was that the real motivation behind participating for a lot of people was the opportunity to network and be with their fellow, colleagues. And so that was a really important message to get out there about, participating in an event. Like, certainly there's this great cause and this great organization, but oh, by the way, don't you want to see folks from across the business, and we're all going to be together. So with some little tweaks and feedback to understand motivations and involvement, we were able to adjust messaging, and we did see incremental increases in participation. And then our message is not differentiating. We hear this one a lot. We're in an industry where a lot of people are focused on the same social issues because they align with our business. But, again, the real basic, the benchmarking, really understanding how your peers are articulating their commitments, looking at the unique assets that you might be able to bring to bear or kind of focus on that maybe perhaps peers can't. And then just understand what are the words that they're using. Where is there a real opportunity to differentiate from a language perspective, and talk about some of your commitments in a new way. We really encourage people to do some digging. See what's out there. Look at the companies beyond your peer set. Who do you really admire? What mediums are they using? How are they reaching and resonating with their consumers and their employees? You can gather a lot of information from digging around. And we also encourage folks, I know everyone on this call doesn't necessarily have control over websites, but really taking a look at the layout of your peers, understanding how they're sharing information. Can you easily find it? Do you have to dig around? Is it only in, a 200-page CSR report? Do they have dashboards? Are they reporting on progress? All of those things, both I think can help you think through what you're not doing that you should be, and think of new ways to be differentiating from your peers.
I don't know if everyone has had the chance to see Apple's latest sustainability update. I think it just came out yesterday or today, but it is definitely differentiating. The content that's covered in it is similar to what we see in a lot of traditional CR reports, but they really present the information in a new and exciting way. If you haven't seen it, I don't want to ruin the fun. It's a 5-minute video, really entertaining and informative. Definitely encourage you to take some time to watch it today. And, it's not the most relatable. I don't think most of us have a budget to have Octavia Spencer starring in our materials. But regardless, I think there are some really great takeaways that we can all glean from thinking outside the box and how to talk about the work that we're doing in a new way.
Awesome. Yeah, everyone go check it out. And then lastly, I'm always surprised we still hear this one. I feel like this was the one I heard a lot when I started working in this space 20 years ago, but we don't want to sound like we're bragging. I don't think it's as frequent, but we talk a lot about being purposeful and being authentic with our clients. Again, finding ways to infuse your message throughout broader corporate communications, just making it feel a part of your brand, and aligned to your values and purpose. So I don't think there's anything wrong about talking about the work that you're doing or the success stories behind your great work. But what we do always caution, because we do see this still time and time again, is don't make these big grandiose statements that perhaps you might not be able to deliver on, or rushing to get the comms out there before perhaps the strategy is in place. That's where we really sort of say, don't go bragging yet. Take the time to think it through. And then, similarly, don't be afraid to talk about your journey or where you might be pivoting or exploring new programs. I think, that's a real opportunity to kind of be open and honest with organizations that might be interested in receiving funding from you or just other external stakeholders. So things don't have to be fully fleshed out before bringing your stakeholders on this journey. Okay. So then, why does it matter? I think the points here on this slide are actually often the ones that we use to make the case for why it's really important to have a thoughtful strategy in place. But to actually reap these benefits, these great business benefits, you need to communicate what you're doing. So if no one is aware, including your own leadership and people, you're not necessarily going to raise visibility or leverage it as a way to recruit and retain talent or bring attention to issues in your community. So we really, believe that you should share these success stories. It helps build credibility. It helps make your strategy more memorable, something that your employees can rally behind and your consumers remember you for. And, we we talk a lot with some of our sister agencies about what strengthens brand, and a lot of it is the intangible, but a lot of it really is this work and being known as purposeful. And more when we look at ratings and rankings out there, you know, the social impact work, ESG work, showing up in the community and being a responsible citizen is really playing a role in brand value. And stakeholders care. I mean, this is, you know, why we're all doing the work that we're doing, but it can have real tangible benefits to the business. It can drive performance. We know that there's increased consumer demand, the employee demand. More and more folks want to work at companies whose values are aligned with their own. That used to just be a point that we would reference, or we would bring, you know, stats to our clients to say, you need to partner with HR, but now they're actually saying our HR teams are coming to us. They want to know how to weave this into our, you know, recruitment materials. We want to use this as a differentiator from the competition. So it's been increased certainly there. And then investor expectations. We know that more and more leaders, again, are focusing on this because they know investors care, and they know ultimately it can drive performance. Okay, I will pass it back to you, Leah.
All right, so how do we actually do this? Probably the reason why you're all here. What do we actually do? Okay, so a lot of our clients have great standalone communications pieces, but what they don't necessarily have is a formal strategy in place that's really helping tie everything together. And for many of them, it's been a while since they've revisited the narrative and the language that they're using. So when we work with our clients to start to build out a really robust social impact communication strategy, there are three main phases or steps that we think about. The first one is immerse. So this is really an audit of what you're currently communicating, what you have the ability to communicate, like what data you're collecting, and working to better understand what your stakeholders want to hear and how they want to hear it. The next is design. So how can you take a step back, look at all of the information that you just scooped up in the immersion phase, and use it to create a narrative that talks about your work in a clear, concise, and compelling way. And then inspire. How can you take this new narrative and use it to communicate with your stakeholders in a way that will resonate with them and engage them? As you start to review and assess your existing efforts, these are some key questions that you'll want to consider. You really want to start with the basics, understanding, you know, your goals and objectives for your communications, who your primary stakeholders are, really, you know, evaluate your current partnership with your comms team, how you're working with them, what resources you have available. And then it's looking at the messaging. What's your current messaging like? Is there a theme that ties everything together? Are you connecting the work back to your business? Is it just kind of like an assortment of random announcements? Really want to understand what's happening there. And then thinking about your tactics. Are you resonating with your intended audience? Do you have a sense of how your current approach is performing? Are there any analytics that you can look at? And then where can you grow? You know, is your messaging timely, or do you find that you're sharing information a month or two later than you'd like? What's it like to navigate your internal and external websites and your newsroom and your social pages? Is it easy to find what you're looking for, or are there noticeable gaps in information? These questions aren't meant to be hard, but really just to help you inventory your current approach. And I actually think that, you know, one of the hardest parts of this is finding the time to do it. Like, I know that your teams are likely lean, you've got a lot on your plates. It's hard to just get through, you know, the expectations day to day. And what we see with our clients, and, you know, we see this with ourselves and our own teams planning. You know, we never really give ourselves, Maureen's laughing, yeah. We never really give ourselves the time we need to lay the groundwork and get our ducks in a row. But it really, really helps. So if you can give yourself some time to think and start seeking out answers to these questions, it's really going to help set you up for success. So the tactics listed here can really help you better understand current awareness and perspectives around your existing communications efforts. And these don't need to be standalone activities. As we mentioned before, these could be part of a larger stakeholder engagement exercise. So if you're already incorporating stakeholder engagement, this is a great time to get some feedback that you could utilize in your communications planning. And if you aren't currently engaging in stakeholder feedback, this is a great place to start because you have, clear answers that you're trying to find. And you can get such good insight from internal stakeholder engagement. Whenever we do leadership interviews, we always ask if they understand the company's overarching social impact strategy, and if they have an elevator pitch that can articulate their company's social impact programming and what it's trying to achieve. And, a lot of times they don't. And if they don't, or they can't explain what their own company is doing, then this is our first clue that the communication strategy is failing. Hearing from employees is also really important. We worked with a client that was having some challenges around engaging employees in their signature philanthropic initiative. And we held some focus groups with employees. And what we found was that there was a lot of confusion because the name of this new program was very similar to another initiative run through the company. So we basically had a bunch of employees being like, yeah, I've done that program. I know that program. I love that program, when they hadn't done it and they didn't know it. And they weren't aware that we were talking about an entirely separate program. And from the CSR team side, they knew that the names were similar, but they didn't think it was going to be, similar enough to cause confusion. So it was really interesting and helpful learning that came out of talking to employees directly. And, similarly, understanding external awareness is just as important. Are your consumers, clients, community members aware of what you're doing? There are a number of industry awards and rankings that are just based on publicly available information. So, you want to make sure that the work you're doing is really easy to find, it's clear, straightforward. And for awards and recognition that require applications, it's often the most straightforward and concisely written ones that stand out. So, think of it as like when you're reviewing a grant application. You just want the most pertinent info that gives you a clear understanding of the need, the work that you're doing, and the impact. So once you have a better understanding of your awareness levels, you can start to design a path forward. So here's where you can look, as we mentioned before, to see what your peers are doing, where it stands out, how are they framing their commitments, where can you differentiate, what do you want to emulate, where are there opportunities for you to grow. We love a SWOT. A SWOT can really help you synthesize the findings from this immersion exercise. So, maybe you'll find that you're creating a lot of great content, but no one is reading it. So there's an opportunity to tweak your delivery models, maybe based off your stakeholder engagement, what you learned from, your internal engagement. Or maybe you're collecting a lot of great data from your grantee impact reports, but you're not really using the information in a meaningful way. So there's an opportunity, just to start getting your information out there. Another client example, we had a client who was investing millions of dollars into their local communities each year, and they were collecting such great data from their grantees. And they also worked really closely with these grantees and had like really meaningful historical relationships that they would tell us about, but they weren't really sharing like any of this information anywhere. I think it was like the program was quickly alluded to in their CSR report, but they had a real opportunity to share, much more broadly. So they eventually ended up creating a specific impact report around this program that could really showcase their work and highlight their grantees. And it was awesome. It gave everyone a really good sense of what they were doing. It was easy to read. It was interesting. And yeah, it was just something that they could really be proud of. And I know that many of you are probably thinking like, no SWOT, don't like a SWOT, but I do promise you that like, it really is helpful and it can help you, map everything out and think through your preliminary path forward. So once you've gathered all your information from the immersion phase, you'll have a good sense of how and what you're already communicating, where your weaknesses are, and where the opportunities lie. And then you can use this information to help dictate your social impact framework, which will really help consolidate and direct your key messaging moving forward. So this probably looks like a really basic model, but we love it. We call it our house and we use it all the time. And when we're working with our clients, help them develop their strategy, help them think about where to focus, what words to use, what words to not use, where are they uniquely positioned to support. This is often what we start with to help boil down to the most salient points and show how the work that they're doing, our actual programming, ladders up to their company's overarching purpose. And this is also really important in helping to create consistency across your messaging. So at the top of the house, we have, your company's purpose, your North Star, really the why behind your company's existence. And this typically serves as the North Star for your team's overarching strategy. Next, we have your social impact commitment. This is the elevator pitch for your work. So we talked a few slides back about wanting your senior executives, honestly, your employees too, to have an elevator pitch on your company's social commitments. This is it. From there, you can kind of take time to build out a more longer social impact narrative. This process, it's typically iterative. It's hard to get right on the first try, but it should explain what you're doing, how you're doing it, why you're doing it, and how it aligns right back up to that, North Star, your purpose. Then at the bottom, we have the actual work that you're doing, your strategic giving, which elaborates on the how in your social impact narrative, and then your employee engagement and community support bucket. So this is typically your non-strategic giving, your matching gifts, your dollars for doers, things like that. We know sometimes companies will use this bucket to further support strategic giving, but we also know that a lot of times companies use this to support employee passions, build in flexibility to respond to real-time events or disasters, continue with legacy sponsorships, things like that. But setting it up in this way really helps delineate giving that is primarily intended to drive your strategy from giving that is primarily intended to serve other purposes. And this is essential for your communication strategy. Are you talking about your strategic giving in a way that ladders up to your company's purpose? Are you talking about your other initiatives in a way that separates it from strategic giving, but maybe connects to other things that are important, like your employee value proposition or your core values, things like that? And this is really important not only for the content of your messaging, but also the recipients of your messaging. Like, do your stakeholders value each of these buckets equally? Or are there situations where you'll want to prioritize specific initiatives or tweak framing depending on the audience?
And one other quick point, I think getting this language right is often the tool that a lot of folks use to be able to easily say, no, we're not going to invest in something that maybe bubbles up either from a leader or an employee. We know that's a pain point for a lot of the folks we work in. So I think that this can really, getting this right, it makes it so much easier to say, this is what we support. And unfortunately, that doesn't align.
Totally. So here we have an example. Harry's is not our client, but because we can't always showcase the work that we do for our clients, we love to use Harry's as an example when we're working with a team and helping them think through their strategic positioning, because it's super straightforward. It's clear, it's easy to understand. At the top, you have their purpose, their North Star. We make products for all men thoughtfully. Then you have their really quick social impact commitment. At Harry's, we believe in better access to mental health care. Like, anyone could remember that. That's like a really easy elevator pitch. And then that's followed by their narrative, which really ties the two together. And then at the bottom, you can clearly see the delineation in giving that supports their strategy, men's mental health, from their other giving. So yeah, we just love this example. We really would encourage you to take some time after this call, start to build your house, see how your own work falls into this framework and where there's an opportunity to streamline and clarify. And this is something that you can continually reference on your team. You can share it with your communications team. It just helps make sure that everyone is on the same page and like there's a basic structure to your messaging. Oh.
Okay. this session is not about measurement, but we did want to call it out quickly because we know these two are so closely linked. It's another place, that I think a lot of folks grapple with, and having a really solid measurement framework in place can really help and inform your storytelling. So if measurement and evaluation is something that you're thinking about, it really requires you to get sharp on your goals, articulate them clear, determine the metrics that will demonstrate you are actually making progress against your goals. But to the point that Leah mentioned earlier about data collection, just for the sake of collecting it, we really encourage you to think about what you might use to amplify your social impact story. Where can you partner with your grantees to kind of capture both, the quantitative and qualitative to amplify your messaging. And just a quick plug, but for those of you who are attending ACCP's annual conference, Leah will be facilitating a session on impact measurement with Excel Energy and kind of diving into this in a bit more detail. And just a few quick examples, because we know bringing it all to life is always more helpful. These are just some quick snippets of companies that I think are doing a really good job of just visually grabbing you by leveraging some of their data to kind of strengthen the story. Nike is a really great example all around of sort of consistent messaging, but also around transparency. They have set some goals, some targets. They are clear about what they are, and then they actually report against those and share that publicly. So we love that. BMS, really tons of different programs and initiatives. So this is an infographic focused on their Global Cancer Disparities Initiative. But even though, a lot of this is still outputs focused, it's a really great way to understand, the specific initiative and showcase the commitments that they've made in a way that kind of grabs your attention, is easy to digest and understand. And then Prudential and Phillips, these are really great examples of sharing the stats and references to, why this social issue matters. They sort of both kind of tee up the why they're investing in these areas. And then they both have time-bound goals that they're working towards for their individual strategies. So in Phillips' instance, it's about individuals reached, and for Prudential, it's about their financial investment. But it's very clear, easy to understand why they're doing what they're doing and what they hope to achieve. And then the last of kind of our three-phased approach is the inspire phase. It's actually the pulling all of the elements that you've considered into place into an actual plan. So, certainly keep that house in mind that Leah talked about, but these kind of core areas are, the things that we typically drop into a chart or a spreadsheet as kind of the headers for your communications plan. If you've done a communications plan before, this is not going to be unfamiliar, but it is a really helpful organizing framework when you're thinking about, what specific goals and objectives you have for communicating different, your overarching strategy or perhaps different initiatives throughout the year. So, it's really important that for each of these, you think about different audiences or messages and sort of personalize that experience so that you can connect with those you're trying to reach. So, with everything, we start with objectives, goals. Are you trying to raise visibility of your programs? Are you trying to increase participation in employee engagement efforts? Are you trying to position yourselves as an industry leader, within a specific social area? Those are just some examples of some of the things you might be trying to achieve through communications, but you can really have an extensive list. And I think then kind of narrowing those down to the most critical that you want to focus on throughout the year is important. Then we focus on identifying your key audiences. Is it the employees? Is it members of the community? Is it peers in the social impact world? Who do you want to receive these messages, and then really segmenting those messages and crafting them, to uniquely reach your audiences is so important. Like, we know the average employee probably isn't going to go and dig through an ESG report. That's not how they want to learn about what you stand for, but we know that's really important for your investors. So really, again, segmenting those communications is a really helpful exercise. And then selecting the right vehicles and channels, certainly, as Leah talked through earlier, that's a big piece of what you can focus on in your SWOT. What did you hear from your stakeholder engagement? How do people like to receive information? What do you maybe perhaps need to do less of? And each message might be different, and it may be multiple vehicles and channels as well. And then determine the frequency and timing. This is often a great place to kind of get pointers and tips from your communications team, but also really important to understand what other major corporate communications might be coming and from who. And so you want to make sure that you're thinking beyond CSR at this point. And then really with any other plan, it's, identify your owners, determine what resources you need and make the case for those resources if necessary, and then bring it all to life and execute your plan. So we do have this in like a more formal template. If anyone's interested, we can always share, but these are kind of the key headlines to pulling together your overarching strategy.
So we just want to leave you with some final takeaways before we go into the Q&A. So first, really, give yourself time to strategize and plan. We know that CSR storytelling can be reactive, and sometimes it has to be. But for where you can plan, it's important to make sure that everything you're communicating ladders up to your overarching purpose and reflects your house. Talk with your stakeholders. Don't assume that you know what they want. Seek feedback and redirect as needed. Work with your comms team to integrate your messaging into broader company messaging as best you can. Your CSR initiative should not be on an island alone, a standalone tab in your newsroom that's updated every couple of months. It should be like more in the mix. Lean into your team's big events and program milestones. Communications aren't one size fits all. As Maureen was just saying, your stakeholders have different needs, interests, and priorities, and you have to segment your communications accordingly. And most important, don't let your good work get buried. Don't make someone go digging. But sometimes too much information is too much information. So just work with your communications team and your web design team to make sure that your content is easily findable, easy to navigate, easy to read and digest, clearly shows, the need you're addressing, your approach, and the impact. And then, you'll really be good to go.
Awesome.
So there are a couple questions in the Q&A. So how about this first one? How often should we be engaging our stakeholders to inform communications?
You want me to go?
Sure.
So I think, we always recommend that it should be an ongoing process. I mean, I don't think that means you should be out there interviewing executives on a monthly basis or anything like that. But, really thinking about the key moments or existing opportunities, as Leah mentioned earlier, to kind of weave in ways to get answers from your stakeholders. If there's convenings, reach out to employees. If you're meeting with grantees on their grant, ask them some questions. So I do think having kind of those more formal moments, like mapped out, certainly on an annual basis, but then setting a cadence for perhaps some more of the informal so that you're regularly getting that feedback is always helpful.
Leah, anything to add before I move on to the next question?
No, I think that's a
So the next question says, we have no control over our website navigation or layout. What are some tips that we can use to make sure our content isn't buried and is able to be seen? And I guess I'll just add one more piece to this question of just maybe like best practices, lessons learned for working with marketing and communication, since I know that that's such an important partnership.
Yeah, I'll take this one. This is a real challenge. This is very hard. We see this a lot. You know, we know that sometimes there is just stuff out of our control, out of your control, that, you know, you can't go in and, you know, recreate the website. But that being said, I think the best thing that you can do is really be an educator to your communications team and your marketing team. Take this opportunity to teach them. I think having concrete examples of kind of best in class work is really helpful. So I think finding those either peers or industry leaders who, when you go on your website, you're like, they're doing this the right way. Like, here are how many clicks they are away from the homepage. Like, they're not sending their website visitors on a maze to find their content. I think being able to show them that is going to be really helpful. And I think also really educating them on the awards and rankings that are based off publicly available information and how good that is for the company, for marketing, and how, you know, you need to make sure that your content is easily accessible and easy to read. To be considered for that is really important.
Great.
And I think updating in real time, you know, we see so many companies where you go to their website and they're like, as of 2016, you know, we've achieved XYZ. And it's like, okay, well, it's 2023. It's almost 2024. And so I think, you know, sometimes because that information is buried, or again, because most people working in this space don't have a dedicated resource, you're not even thinking about like where dates might be mentioned. And that's content that should be regularly updated. So those are just, I mean, websites are crazy. Like, we've been through some website refreshes of our own. We know it can be super frustrating to have no control over like the templates and the navigation. But yeah, I think Leah's right. Like, it really is going back armed with some of those best in class examples and saying like, this is how everybody else is doing it. We need to get up to par.
Yeah.
And so the last question we have, and again, everyone who's still our audience, please put in any additional questions that you have in the Q&A. It says, we have a comms plan in place, but it still feels like there's lack of awareness with employees. What would you suggest to ensure employees know about the work we are doing? So just like any best practices or tips that you have seen work with other clients might be helpful.
Yeah, I think when it comes to employees, you know, partnering with HR first and foremost is always a great place to start. I think if, again, we talked about employee value proposition earlier, and recruitment and retention, but I think any places to kind of inform your employees before they even work for you about what you do, making it part of that recruitment conversation, having it part of your onboarding when like new folks are coming in, being able to go in and do, you know, a presentation or having collateral. I think those are all really important first touch points, like brand new, let's grab them. But, you know, of course, you're always going to have employees that have been with you for 20 plus years and maybe aren't paying attention or aware. So I think it's really, again, those internal partnerships, getting crystal clear on internal communications, places you can build off, you know, making sure your executives have like talking points for speeches they're giving that might, you know, they might want to be able to showcase some of this work. I'm trying to think of what else. And just like a repository of stories that might be relevant, like in communities where people work. Those are just some quick tidbits.
That's great.
Yeah, just to add to that, like town halls, quarterly meetings,
yeah,
holiday parties, like anytime you're all together, that's an opportunity to share your work and share your messaging.
Great. Well, with that, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Changing Our World for hosting this session, for Maureen and Leah for sharing their expertise. I think you've given us some great tips and an awesome framework to continue to refer back to help really maximize our storytelling. Before you sign off, I do encourage you to please take the session survey. We dropped the link into the chat. On the screen is a QR code. Your feedback is super important to us and helps us build future valuable programs. And with that, I wish you all a great afternoon and hope to see you at an upcoming ACCP event very soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.